Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
You are listening to Scream with Ryan C. Showers, the podcast for Scream fans just like you. Join Ryan every week as he takes a deep dive into the horror film series that defined the 90s and redefined the genre. Scream with Ryan C. Showers is your source for scene and quote analysis, character dissections, and the latest news about upcoming installments of the Scary Movie franchise.
I hear you like horror movies, Kirby, but do you like them as much as him?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Scream with Ryan C. Showers podcast, where the film critic meets the Scream fan twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Now, before I go any further, I need to thank the producers of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. They include Ashley Summers from the Squirrel and Spud Shop. She and I host a Scream game every Wednesday on Instagram, so please check that out. I also need to thank TJ Jones, who comes from the Box Office Buds podcast. He is responsible for all of the graphic design of Scream with Ryan C. Showers in terms of new episode cards on social media promotion. So thank you so much to TJ for all he does. I also need to thank contributors Mark Karim, Mark Vieira, and Joey Vallese. Joey Vallese is the guy who writes the scripts for Scream with Ryan C. Showers. Episode 112, we wrote a Scream 7 script, which I read out loud, about the end of the Carpenter sisters storyline. And then the sequel to that was called Screams. It was centered around the legacy of Gail Weathers. That's episode 155. And Joey is currently working on the final Scream, which this is a product that is going to examine the relationship, the marriage of Mark and Sydney. Unlike the real Scream 7, this will feature Mark Kincaid as Sydney's husband, and she won't have a teenage daughter. Both of her daughters will be young, so it'll be much different than the real Scream 7 we're going to get. But that is going to be coming to the podcast late summer, early fall, so please tune in for that. I need to thank everybody over at Patreon. Thank you to everybody who subscribes to the Patreon at any and every tier. I'm an independent entity, so any bit of support that comes into the Patreon goes back into the podcast. Joining the Patreon gets you ad-free and early access to every episode, as well as the opportunity to join the community of the show. We have group chats across social media. In particular, Instagram is really the hub of the podcast community. More importantly, joining the Patreon is the vessel in which you would use to come onto the podcast, either in a one-on-one situation with me or a small panel. In addition, there's a guaranteed invite every month to a big group Zoom recording about a Scream topic. An exciting feature of the podcast is the audio commentary episodes. Every Scream fan knows what it was like listening to Wes Craven do the audio commentaries for the original trilogy and Scream 4, with Marianne Maddalena and Kevin Williamson and Patrick Lussier. And what I'm trying to do for my Patreon subscribers is I am going to be performing an audio commentary of a Scream or a Scream-related movie, one per month, every month. And my goal is to try to approach these as I'm doing deep analytical analysis about the characters, about the themes, about just general reaction. So it's something that I'm really proud of and I hope continues to be a cherished part of the podcast. So the commentary is available as a normal podcast episode for anybody to listen to like they would any other podcast, but it will also be available as a video watch along. So everybody, please go over to Patreon, subscribe to Scream with RCS. I would be eternally grateful. So I need to go through and thank everybody over at Patreon who is subscribed as a stab investor or a daddy/mama Ghostface. So the daddy/mama Ghostface of the Patreon are Carrie Tenney, Brett Janovich, Corey Wilson, and Stevie Shears. The stab investors include Allie, Mark Karim, Tamika Jones, David D., Garrison Nichols, Gustavo Mora, Jess Mariano, Joey Nobarini, aka The Vault, Josh Calamari, Josh Carr, Scream Queens podcast, both Josh and Justine, The Horror Project podcast, Justin Weir, Kevin Abner, Mark Vieira, PWO5, aka Philip Douglas, Quentin Harrison, and Sam Levy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for the final episode of Season 4. And not only is it the final episode of Season 4, but this episode is airing on Friday, June 20th, 2025. So listeners of the podcast will remember that date. I've said it many, many times on the podcast. It was very consequential for the show. On June 20th of 2023, Joey Vallese and I released a script of Scream 7, imagining what the ending of the Carpenter sister storyline could be, while also bringing Sydney back into the fold and making Gale really important again. And it was a huge blockbuster episode for the podcast. And it still remains like the most listened to episode of this podcast of all time. Just for perspective's sake, Radio Silence, their appearances, times that by 5, and you get the people who listen to Joey's script. I am pleased to be celebrating the 2-year anniversary of our Scream 7 script with the writer himself, Joey Vallese. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Ryan. What a exciting and inspirational introduction. I haven't been on here in a while, I don't think. I've been with you in a minute, but
since Screams,
so
and that
nice.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I can't believe it. So you've only been on a couple of times in season 4. So season 4, we did not have a script. We had 2 scripts in season 3. We had Scream 7, which is episode 112. Go listen. And we had Screams, which is the follow-up Gale Weathers sequel that we love, of course, in episode 155. So they came out very close together, much like Scream 1 and 2. And we have another story we're working on. And like Scream 3 did back in the day, there's a little bit of a break between part 2 and part 3. So Joey, thank you so much. First of all, just thank you for writing those scripts. I get compliments on them all the time. People still will reach out to me and said, "Oh, I cried at Sam's death," or something like that, or how shocked they were about this, or how much they love Sydney here, or whatever. So you really did something magical with both of them, and I'm so proud of them. It's literally my favorite thing we've ever done with the podcast ever.
Well, thank you. I mean, it might sound trite or corny, but I mean it. It's a real privilege to have been able to exercise and realize in a certain way my own vision for these films after 6, and to get them, to have my own or our own trilogy completed in this manner before the real 7 comes out is a really exciting, I forgot that 7 and Screams actually happened in the same season. That's wild to me. I forgot that happened that fast. But yeah, no, it just feels like a real, I don't know. I've said many times I never wrote fan fiction, aside from when I was a really little kid, and I was a little bit cautious and hesitant about it. But when I thought of it as an assignment for like a spec script, it allowed me to feel, serious about it and take it. Not that I wouldn't have anyway. I'm a Virgo. I would have taken it very seriously regardless, whether there were 5 listeners or 5,000 or 50,000. But when I gave myself permission to think about it almost as like a real commissioned, spec script, in that sense, I use commissioned loosely, but more like in the definition of somebody inviting you to do something with sort of the promise that it will have an audience at the end, which is exactly what you did. And that's why I was able to realize it. And I don't know, I feel excited to see if this new 7, just by like the sheer act of my scripts being in existence and thinking through all these different scenarios, I wonder how much will feel, like in conversation with the scripts that I wrote. Not that I think, Kevin Williamson or Guy Busick were, searching the internet to look for Joey Vallese's screenplays to, copy stuff, although who knows, it would be a compliment. But I think that there's just something, I think I was so thoughtful to really examine the possibilities, and I ran through so many possibilities and options with you for both those scripts, that I can't help but feel like some of what was put out there might manifest in some way, because it just makes sense logically, conceptually, narrative wise, right? So I'll be excited to see how that kind of carries over, if it does it all. But
I think that it will. I think because I don't know. I do kind of think that they've listened to the scripts, or they've seen the scripts. I mean, hire Joey for Kevin, hop on it. So I want to talk really about Scream 7 with you, just kind of look back at the past 2 years, because it's wild, right? But before then, you are in the middle of writing the final Scream, which is the 3rd chapter of this story arc that we started with 7. And then we had, and so in 7 is kind of like a three-hander. It's Sam and Sydney and Gale. And then Screams is a Gale-centered thing. Sydney's there, of course. And now we finally get Sydney to have her own story with the final Scream. It's, in our version, she's still married to Kincaid, which I think is like, a lot of people have told me, like, this is so silly, but like a lot of people have told me that they feel as though the Carpenter story is complete because of your script. Like, even though we didn't get to see it on screen, we have this story, and it's so. And I've heard it from many people saying, like, in my mind, that story is closed because I have this as an ending. So in a similar way, we kind of get to do that with Mark Kincaid, because there was such an emphasis on him for the past 4 years with the Radio Silence era. I feel like people still want a resolution to that. And I think that
Mhm.
your script will provide that. It's not going to be what people are expecting, I don't think. But so just for perspective, Joey has the film outlined, every scene. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. I love the motive. I love the arc. I love what it's doing. It's very thoughtful. Love it. But Joey, is there anything you want to tease about the final Scream before, while you're still writing it?
Yeah, I'm happy to tease. I mean, I said to you that it didn't dawn on me that we were doing sort of these overlapping trilogies. We were ending the Carpenter sister trilogy, but then starting a new one with 7 at the same time. So we have these sort of interlocking sets of stories. And everything that happens in the final Scream, there have been breadcrumbs since my 7, right? Because we have that scene with Sydney at home with her daughters, with Mark, getting them ready to go to the safe house. And of course, Sydney can't stay put, right? And a lot of that is motivated by her guilt for not being there for Gail, who got really, nearly murdered in 6. And as my script tells it, she was in pretty bad shape afterwards. So we have a lot of motivation from Sydney to properly reinsert her in a story and have it make sense for her to ever go back to Woodsboro again. And so I've been laying those breadcrumbs, because really what I'm envisioning for the final Scream is real, it's kind of a send up on domestic thrillers of the 90s, but it's not satirical. It just is really it's leaning hard into the domestic life of Sydney and Mark and the girls. Gail will find her way there in a very organic way. It feels like these murders that occur they're very well laid out by the killer or killers. There's a real serious motivation. I think I want people to both feel like, of course, it had to go here. Where else could it go? And also feel surprised by it. Like, I want it to feel both inevitable and surprising at the same time. And I also have to introduce new characters to make it make sense in a way that feels not like we're just shoehorning in new people for more body count, new people for new killers or anything like that. It has to really link to Sydney's life with Mark and her kids. And I think I achieved that. So it feels lived in. We're going to start right just in Sydney's life. This is just a few years later from Screams. It's not much, it's funny that it's about 2 years later for 7 from 6, because I think it's about 2 years later for my script as well. The girls are still little. They are not new Sydney Prescotts. They're still little girls, they're like 12 and 10 or something. Like, they're still kids.
Which, this is another thing that's so cool about your script, right? Is the fact that in the real Scream 7, we have Mark Evans and we have Tatum, meaning like, in this like H2O older child
like
and
16
parent,
or 17, right? As far as we know. Yeah.
versus yours, which is Kincaid, and the kids are still really, really little. So they're very different. There's no like weird cosplaying. It's just a very different version of the story, which I think is cool. And I think it's something that people are going to enjoy and be hungry for at the time, because the script will be released basically within weeks of the trailer coming, which is so cool. But anyways, Joey, go on.
Yeah. No, that's great. One thing that I will tease that I think people will be excited to hear is that Gail Weathers is pure anti-Gail in this. Not A-N-T-I, anti-Gail. She's anti-A-U-N-T-I-E Gail to Sydney's kids in a way that is funny and feels very true to the character. It's not like there are funny moments, but it's not played for laughs. There's a real, evolution of the relationship between Sydney and Gail's relationship to Sydney's domestic life, and also feeling like we're making good on Gail's desire to make Dewey proud and to not do anything, not to ever harm Sydney or put Sydney in harm's way. Because remember, at the end of Screams, when she's asked who she would die for, she says Sydney, right? There's nobody else, because, she doesn't have Dewey anymore. And she feels tremendous responsibility for Sydney being in New York City in that film, and worried about her getting back to her kids. And there's a lot of willingness to sacrifice herself, her morals, for the safety of Sydney, right? What she is, spoiler alert if you haven't listened to Screams, the deal she tries to make with the killer at the end to get Sydney to safety is very, very, I think, serious, very compelling. So everybody who's thinking about how she will be there, she's not like living with them, but she's there, and she's there in a way that makes sense. And she has a relationship with Sydney's kids, and it's by necessity too. Some things happen that Sydney needs someone she can trust, like truly trust, because that is one of the, like questions or sub themes of the film, that Sydney has been living in a very comfortable, suburban, but affluent, safe space with her children, has really made a life. And then suddenly, when the killings start again, Sidney Prescott goes into Sidney Prescott mode, and the script only takes place over a little bit less than 48 hours. So it's very quick, and it shows just how quickly Sydney can go back into like, can I trust any of these people around me? Right? It seems like she can, until there's reason to be like, fuck, like, yeah.
Everything you just described, no one will see what's coming in terms of like what and why Sydney can't trust anybody. It's very surprising, yet it's so there. It's so just like, once you said it, I never would have thought of it. Once you said it, it's like it was hanging there the whole time. So
I mean,
that's
the gasp
great
from
writing
you,
is.
the gay gasp from you when I told you what would happen, what would what thing that would cause conflict would be. It's not anything, it's sadly not anything very uncommon, but I think it will sort of smack people in the face when it happens, and how it sort of impacts the rest of the script. Because as much as we're okay with gore, as much as we're okay with killings and fucked up motives, there are some lines that in some genres and with some characters we just don't feel can be crossed, and when they get crossed, it just changes the vibe. And so I don't know, I think people will be into it. I think it makes sense. I think it feels real. And, you know, this feels like a true domestic drama with a ghost face or two or three, who knows, lurking around and in Sydney's life, and really bringing it home to her in a way. Because don't forget, Sydney for, you know, 5, the real 5 and 7. Actually, no, let's go back. 3, 4, 5, and then my 7 and my 8. Sydney has gone to the danger. The danger hasn't come home to her yet.
So, no, I think the thing about this that's interesting is like Scream has always been a domestic drama in some respects. I mean, in terms of like Scream 1 or before Scream 1, the prequel to Scream 1, Maureen Prescott's story is a domestic drama. So you kind of tap into something that is a part of the franchise and that should be a part of the franchise that hasn't been explored in this way. So I'm just out of curiosity, just for people to, you know, visualize or to do some homework, what would you say are 3 to 5 movies, domestic, erotic, horror thrillers that you would use as inspiration?
Well, I want to be careful because I don't want to give any spoilers out by naming some of those movies.
Okay.
Because there's like 2 big ones that if I say it, then people are gonna be like, oh, that's what happens. I definitely have inspiration from The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I think that we can say that there's some single white female influence in there as well. I think we can say that there is influence from Basic Instinct. And I think we might be able to say Unlawful Entry, the Madeline Stowe, Ray Liotta, like crazy cop who's right, like obsessed with, even though I'm not saying one way or another if there's a crazy cop who's obsessed with anybody, but these are some of them that feel like in that spirit, like a real like 90s domestic. There are 2 really big ones that I'll talk about after the episode
in the commentary,
because I don't because I don't want to give them away, because if I say it, then you're gonna think, oh, there's a blank that happens, right? I don't want that to be the case. There's a little known thriller called The Temp that kind of went under the radar. It was with Laura Flynn Boyle, Timothy Hutton, Faye Dunaway, about a temp who comes to work at a advertising agency and kind of climbs the ranks fast, but is not who she claims to be. And it bombed and it got bad reviews, but it's one of my little favorite gems. And though there is no temp agency or a secretary or anything like that, there's some there are some things that happen in that I also feel motivated by. So really it's just the pastiche of the 90s thriller, and there will be some sort of knowing winks to the fact that it feels like they're in a domestic drama in that way. But I also think that there are kind of in a way that I think that maybe a similar kind of, I don't want to say that it's like Halloween Ends, but I think that you and I discussed a little bit how there's like, it's different enough and grounded enough in some ways that it feels like it's going on this path, but it's different because that's a very, very different, you know, unique, love it or hate it kind of film. And it has grown on me over the years in large part because of Ryan making good arguments for why it is interesting. I mean, it is the most interesting narrative-wise, for sure, of those movies. Whereas I feel like the final Scream feels really much smaller in scope than the other 2 scripts that I wrote, but by necessity, it feels really intimate. But it's almost like when the Ghostface killings happen, you almost like, not that you forget it's a Scream movie, but it feels really jarring to have this attack happen or this phone call happen.
You have different types of characters here that different from the previous two. Like in 7, we pretty much played with like most of the characters we had met before, right? Or at least half of them. In Screams, it was a bit different because like each of those characters was kind of like almost like a stab 3 character in a way where they served a purpose and they were beautifully constructed, but they weren't like, so super deep in some respects. Whereas here, the characters you're doing, they're so important to the whole storyline, and so it's a different experience. I think people will really get sucked into the story of it, and that's what we want. We want people to forget about life and just be like so entranced in the story. Speaking of which, I listened back to Scream 7 yesterday for the first time in a long time, and I've listened to it, of course, dozens of times now. But it was weird to watch. It was weird to listen to it. And I think it's a timeless story. The story is so good. It's so emotional. It's awesome. But I will say it was odd. It was almost like stepping into a time machine, just because like back then things were different, and it was even like I'm not even like talking about like Melissa, like but like just like going back to like right after Scream 6 when there was so much buzz post 6, and there was like things that we should do and shouldn't do, and like wanting Nev to come back. So all of those things, it was literally like being sent in a time machine back to that time before Melissa was let go, and just the way that we think about things and talk about things today, wildly different compared to back then. So it was fun in that respect, but man, I still cried. I mean, like, it's such a beautiful story. It's so brilliant. It's honest. And like, the big thing about this is like the way that like people understand Scream 5 and 6 to be like, because in the way that there's like an artificial aspect of the way that everybody survives and is stabbed, and there's no real like story direction, especially in Scream 6. Yours is the complete opposite of it, where there is a firm direction from the very first moment, literally the first line of the script, onward. You're laser focused, and you really get to tell the truth of Sam Carpenter and Christina Carpenter in a way that's unwavering. You make no compromises about it. You don't care if it's sad. You really tell the truth of those characters and where their arcs should have gone in a way that wasn't catering to audiences. In terms of like, ooh, popcorn, fun, beach volleyball, core 4, you went there. And that is what Scream needs. Volleyball. That is what Scream was, and that's what Scream should be.
Yeah. I agree. Now everybody knows. If you haven't heard, you should obviously listen to the episode and listen to the commentary. But as you know, the push for both the opening sequence and the revelation of the killer in 7 were both like real conversations where I had all the doubt in the world that they would work or make sense, and I poo-pooed, and Ryan was like, no, I really think you could do this, and I think you could do it for these reasons. And so I agree with you. And also, I was so motivated by how disappointed I was by 6. I was motivated by it to write 7. And I didn't erase anything about 6. I didn't erase anything about 5, which I really enjoy. I just filled in gaps. I used what I didn't like or didn't understand about 6, or where they went or where they didn't go. And I used it to sort of both comment on what came before it, but reinforce it and to have it make more sense and to bring closure to it. And I think that's how it should always go. I think that there's a tendency, when a franchise has a lot of sequels, where if something kind of goes off the deep end in one direction, they don't really correct it. They just keep kind of leaning into it until there's a reboot down the line. And it feels like we are, regardless of your feelings about what's happened to Melissa and with Spyglass, it seems like in a lot of ways we're getting that recentering and that soft reboot or something soon, rather than having to wait another 10 years for it. And so when I was writing 7, I was thinking about how to make use of it, but also how to set up for myself my own completely original story in Screams, and then my own completely original story in this final one. Like, I have to now look at what I've done, but everything in Final Scream will still live in service and in conversation with the real 1 through 6 and then mine. And I think that's the only way to do it. You have to honor, you can bring up everything by making the next film or the next script really strong and really intelligent and pay homage and address things that are not addressed in the other movies. Like the way my 7 directly addresses Mindy being wrong all the time. And she is, asking Uncle Randy to, guide her through it. And then the girlfriends are like, but didn't he die? Like, he
Right.
obviously didn't know what he was doing either. And then to have that attack in the Meek's house and have Mindy lifted up and smashed into the shrine of her uncle, that does so much, right? Without even to say anything. And
Yeah.
I was using everything that I had in order to elevate, right? And same with screams going backwards. So the goal is not to erase anything. The goal is not to downplay anything. The goal is just to help everything else make sense, though I will never mention the Kirsch family in my scripts ever. Even though
Well,
they are responsible for the events of 6, I will never mention them by name. I'm sorry. That's where I draw a line.
exactly. And I agree with that line being drawn. You wrote the scripts and then I performed and then like did the editing and Albert helped, of course. But you know, a
Yes.
part of me wishes like I don't know. I think that there is such a huge improvement in the technical aspect of the script from 7 to the to Screams. Like in terms of like my ability to like know how to perform the characters and like the
Yeah.
volume and like the cleanliness. It's a very like Scream 7, my performance is very like the raw emotion is great, but there's almost a part of me
Yeah.
that wishes I could go back and like do a, you know, like Taylor's version, Orion's version of Scream 7. Maybe one day whenever I have free time, but like,
Who says you can? If you ever have 20 extra hours lying around in your life,
right?
which probably won't happen.
But so, you know, but it's still a wonderful thing. I'm really proud of it and I'm excited to do the final Scream. And there was just like I was listening to it yesterday and I forgot how much you make me like Sam. You know, and I was a Sam defender
Yeah.
before, you know, Scream 6 really
I wish
tainted her for
people
me.
could go back and see not only Sam, you were a real Melissa Barrera defender about her performance, about the nuance of her performance for both movies.
Again, like that was part of like the time capsule aspect. I was like being transported back in time, like, oh wow, I forgot how passionate I was about Sam. Like I loved this idea of like I asked you for a Sydney, Gale, and Sam movie, and you gave it to me in the most brutal and honest way. And like but honestly, like the last 30 minutes of Scream 7 of your script are such an adrenaline rush. Like I've listened to this script literally probably 30 times, and yet yesterday I was still in it. I was like getting revved up, and like I think that if this would have ever been filmed, I think Sam's death at the end would have been the best. It would have been the only thing I think in the Scream franchise that could ever challenge Casey Becker in terms of the best death ever. Congratulations.
As our dear friend Jess rightly saw when she heard it, that it was deeply inspired by Nancy's death in Elm Street 3. So I gave Sam, I think, the most like complimentary send off that one can give. Yeah. Anyway, I hope everybody enjoys the final Scream. It's a lot of care and thought went into it, and I think that it's going to, I don't know, I think it's going to satisfy people's sweet tooth, and I think it's going to be fun to get that kind of movie or that kind of script and then get the real thing a few months later, which will inevitably be quite different just by dint of, you know, us not having the same mark. Yeah.
We're shooting for Friday, September 19th, which is very close to Joey's birthday. We love a Virgo. May get pushed and it may come sooner. We don't know. So, but that is the tentative release date. So, Joey, good luck finishing the script. And thank you so much for all you've done for the podcast. And I just want to express this, like you are genuinely loved by this community because of those two scripts. Even if people don't know your full name, they know Joey, or they just know you as the guy who wrote the scripts. And so you are, I don't think you understand the impact these two scripts have had. So thank you.
I appreciate that a lot. That makes me really happy to hear. It's good for a writer to know that his work is getting read or heard by a lot of people. And, you know, this is, I've been shocked by the amount of listenership for those episodes. And even if they realize or don't realize what that does for me and my passion and inspiration to keep me going, and how it shows up in other projects in my life, it means the world. So I hope that, you know, we get a similar kind of reaction to the final Scream.
So Joey, please tell everybody where they can find your book and podcast.
Thank you. So, thanks. The podcast plug. The book is It Came from the Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror, published by Feminist Press. You can buy it at feministpress.org. During the month of June for Pride Month, you can actually get it for 35% off on their website, which is a steal. You can also find it wherever you buy books. You can find me on X, though I'm not on there like ever anymore, at Homo Horror, but you're most likely to find me on Instagram at It Came from the Closet, it_came_from_the_closet. You can reach out to me there. And my podcast is actually not Scream related. It's called Introverted but Willing to Discuss Tori Amos. Me and my two of my besties, Matt Mazer and Kristen Keys, we have a podcast about our queen, Tori Amos, in which we create fresh playlists for her albums and based around themes. And it has enjoyed a recent spike in listenership and subscribers, which has been really enthralling because it's just kind of a dorky thing that we do like once a month for fun. But if you are into Tori Amos or interested in learning more more about singer-songwriter Tori Amos, you can go to YouTube and subscribe to Introverted But Willing to Discuss Tori Amos, or you can find the podcast recordings wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for reminding me to plug that. I appreciate it, Ryan.
Please go subscribe to his channel on YouTube.
That's sweet. And there is a lot of Tori Amos influence on Taylor Swift that I'll have to, we'll probably do a whole episode someday. Maybe you can even be on as a guest and we could do some side-by-sides for you. She, several years ago, covered a bit of a Tori Amos song called A Sort of Fairy Tale in concert when she was in DC. So she is a confirmed fan as far as we know. Yeah.
I'm there.
All right. Awesome. All right. Love you, Ryan. Thank you
Love
so
you
much.
too.
And thank you all. It's truly a privilege. So I'm back to work on the script right after I leave.
All right. Thanks, Joe. And thank you for coming to celebrate the anniversary of Scream 7 and just the season finale of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. So,
Congratulations on another season, Ryan.
hello, everybody. Welcome to the next segment of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers, and sitting here with me is my friend Ivan. Now, Ivan is the person who was on the Scream 4 episode back in April where we talked about the Scream 4 era. Back in that episode, he teased the episode we're about to do now, which is called Scream Generations, and kind of describing, like, within the fandom, what generations different fans fall into. So everybody, please welcome Ivan. He was amazing on the last episode, and the last episode was actually a big hit. It was very well listened to. People really enjoyed that episode. So Ivan, hello.
Oh, that's amazing. That makes me so happy. I was really nervous about that episode and how it was gonna come off, I guess. And I'm from what I've seen and everything, it's really great. So here's round 2, I guess.
So Ivan, you teased this idea of different Scream generations on the previous episode you did back with for Scream 4 back in April. So why don't you clarify for me what you mean and break down what does each generation mean?
Right. So the concept of a Scream generation that I brought up, to me, in my mind, how I would define that as like a period of time where the fandom was pretty much sort of a unit encapsulated in a certain time without too much disorder in terms of people dropping out in huge swaths and numbers and stuff, and just sort of encapsulated by the movies that were coming out at the time or not coming out at the time. Obvious generation 1 would be Scream 1, 2, 3, 1996 until the year 2000, until I would say February. I want to just sort of like close it off at Scream 3's release, pretty much. And then the entirety of the 2000s, I would say, is Generation 2. And this is sort of like the dark ages of the Scream fandom. And then Generation 3 would be the generation I came in, or Generation Scream 4. Everything relating to Scream 4, I would say this would start probably around 2009, 2010, the early production of Scream 4. And then after that, MTV Scream generation after Scream 4. Then everything after that, radio silence would be Generation 5. And we are now in Generation 6. So if I may, I would like to just go, to make my point clearer, I would like to go through each generation a little bit one by one, starting with Generation 1. Hopefully people are bearing with me and I don't sound ridiculous.
So I think it's great the way you split it up here, and I think it's actually really good in what you did with Generation 2, because me as a Generation 2 person, like, I have a very specific experience that is not the same as people who saw it in Scream 1, 2, and 3 in theaters in the 90s, but also who knew about Scream and lived with Scream for so long before the release of Scream 4. So I think that's a really great distinction. And there is a very clear difference between like Scream 4 people and then the MTV version of Scream with the TV show people. Like, you know, I think that's, you really hit the nail on the head in terms of the divides here. And of course, like, the big question, of course, is the radio silence era. But I think that, for instance, the Gen 5 is going to be different than what we're going to see post Scream 7, which is going to be Gen 6, right? Where it's the Williamson era, the return of Sydney, and like kind of that vibe. That's going to be distinctive to the radio silence era.
We sure are, but before we get there, let's just go way back into the 90s. So I was not around, like I said, for Generation when I was a small child, but from observing and from studying history, which I love, studying internet history. So Generation 1, everybody knows what the internet was like in the 90s. It was not what it is today at all. It was very sort of primitive, very basic. And the thing is, in relation to Scream, the vast majority of people that made up what you could call the Scream fandom were not actually really on the internet. Probably that's fair to say. Maybe like sort of very casually looking at websites, the forum culture, stan culture, obviously that barely existed. The people who were on the forums and the websites, so back then being on those things, like you had to be sort of like a super nerd, so to speak. So it's very not what it is today. Nerd culture was very niche. The super fans were on the internet and on these websites, but obviously the vast majority of the Scream fandom was just regular people just outside in the real world. So the online presence in this era sort of minimal, but yeah, this is the golden age. This is what made Scream what it is. This is what defines Scream. And also these people are these fans from this period are the reason for what we have now. Everything basically was given to us by these amazing people and the intense fandom they've exhibited. So thank you, Generation 1.
So these people are so fucking cool because they got to live the moment. They got to experience beat by beat everything Scream, everything that we talk about on this podcast, live in the 90s and like see them in theaters and like be a part of that time and moment. Like that's so cool. And like honestly, there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who were those people. Like I definitely have like the age group of like people who went to see Scream in theaters in the 90s who listen to this podcast and who are part of the Patreon. And I'm really grateful for that. Like it's almost like they're like an artifact that I want to put in the museum of Scream in the podcast.
I've noticed. Yeah, that's right.
But it's also cool for them too because they get to have Scream be something so different to them back then when they were teenagers to now like adults, right? And they get to come on this podcast and engage like in the Facebook groups and like be a part of the community in a different way, in an older and wiser way, like in an all-knowing way. And I can't imagine how satisfying it will be for them to see Scream 7 in theaters after having seen the original trilogy in theaters and lived through Scream 4 and the 5 and 6 era, which is very mixed for a lot of people. You know, it's just such a cool thing for them to have this full circle moment.
So Group 2, so this one is really interesting. So Group 2, basically, from what I gather, basically people leftovers from Generation 1 and people who were... So Scream fans existed in the 2000s for sure. However, indie stuff and Scream in general was not super cool in the 2000s, like we've discussed in the last episode. So these people are real troopers, so they're really real, like real people, I guess, sticking by what they loved when it wasn't super popular. However, that being said, the online traces are almost impossible to find. The only thing I found was on MySpace. It was a group called The Devil's Eyes, and they also had a website. The Devil's Eyes comes from the Rob Zombie Halloween movie. I believe that was the reference, but their stuff was Ghostface themed, so obviously I'm assuming sort of a general horror forum website thingy that also was super into Scream. Outside of that, I really struggled to find, like I said, these were the dark ages of the Scream fandom and Scream in general. So sort of. However, I'm also gonna mention back when the IMDb message boards existed, I remember going way back on the cursed threads on there, and I remember seeing a lot of those people from, I'm assuming, Generation 1, who were really excited about sort of bringing that into the new decade. However, that didn't really end up happening with Cursed. It didn't really click. I guess people weren't super pleased with it. So yeah, that's basically it from Generation 2. I don't know. A lot of people who loved Scream sort of, I guess, put it on the back burner for the time being is how I would describe it. So yeah.
So I love what you did here. I think this is such a cool idea. And as a Generation 2 person, I think it's awesome. And like, but I don't think it's based on age per se, because like my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, who is technically Gen Z, I consider her Generation 2 because she watched Scream with me, the original trilogy building up, for years and years before Scream 4 ever came out.
Oh yeah, sorry, if I may interject, I know what you're gonna say. So a lot of people watching the movies on DVD and stuff, because this was when they were sort of being watched post theatrical release. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Carry on. Yeah.
I have to say, just though, as a Gen 2 person, it was really cool to do what I did, which was kind of have the trilogy as a unit a couple of years after it was really hot, when it was still in the minds of people and still in the zeitgeist in some way, and live with it before Scream 4, because you really got to define the trilogy as like a complete storyline. And then you had the anticipation building up to Scream 4 when, you know, it was still so new to you in a way. So it was something very awesome. And like, you know, I feel like even though it would have been amazing to have been alive in the 90s and experienced it going to the theater and stuff like that, I still am very happy with my experience as somebody who got to live the original trilogy for a long time and then get the announcement of Scream 4 and then go to see Scream 4 in theaters. Like, that was fun.
Sure, yeah, actually, so I'm assuming a lot of new Scream fans were birthed in this time period. So obviously, this whole entire decade, the 2000s, this was when huge swaths of people were actually being introduced to the franchise post the theatrical releases and stuff. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think a lot of people actually had their first Scream viewing in like 2005 and stuff. Generation 3. Yeah, so this is me. This is the Scream 4 generation, and this is not only the time when I really got into online stuff in regards to Scream. This was the first time I even watched a Scream movie late 2010, so I would say 2010, the beginning of production of Scream 4. This was a really exciting time. This was still early internet, but it had evolved a little bit. So what I didn't mention before, and what I wanna sort of bring into this discussion, because I think it's important to sort of grasp the whole picture. I just want to introduce the element of postmodernism and what it means to each of these generations and what it means to the internet. So generation 1, obviously the media was quite postmodern. So what is postmodern? It is a mode of thinking, to describe it in the most simple manner. It is a stylistic choice in the arts, so to speak, that sort of has a very cynical, very sort of parodied tone, very ironic, very referential. Basically, Scream would be the very, very clear example of what postmodernism is: self-referential, genre-bending, subversion. So a lot of media in the 90s was very that. However, the online sphere was very sort of almost kind of counterculture in that way. Like I said, there were nerds, they were sort of against the mainstream in a way. Not to say that Scream was like super egregiously, like, it was mainstream, it was the MTV generation for sure. But what I want to say is the next generation, generation 2, actually is the postmodern generation. It was all the same trappings, all the same things as generation 1 or the 90s. But actually, philosopher Alan Kirby, maybe a coincidence, who knows, in 2006, maybe Kevin Williamson was reading up on postmodernism, who knows, and was inspired, created the term postmodern. And basically what postmodern is everything that Scream 4 was about. Postmodern, but in a very sort of cynical, really, really mean, sort of cruel way, almost mocking tone, vulgar, crass, shallow. This was the people were self-aware and sort of meta, but in a really, like I said, shallow way compared to these media, with the reality shows of the time, especially. This is something he writes about, so perhaps, especially considering that Scream 4 is basically about all of these things, maybe Kim Williamson was inspired. So anyways, so what I wanted to say in relation to generation 3 is, we on the forums, like I talked about the USMB, the Ultimate Screen Message Board on the last episode, we were also sort of counterculture in our own right at that time, because we were basically rejecting a postmodernism. We were very sincere. We were kind of nerdy. We were really pedantic about stuff. We were sort of what people would have considered uncool for caring about stuff, for being super facetious and detail oriented. But yeah, I think generation 3 has that in common with generation 1. So yeah, I would just define generation 3 as being postmodernism, and we were really just enthusiastic and really, really deeply in love with the things that we liked at the time. And I think this is really reflected a lot the most in the stuff we produced back then. The fan scripts, the edits, the tribute videos, we were really passionate, and it was very sincere compared to, not to jump ahead, but compared to Generation 5, which is anything but that. So yeah, Generation 3 really sort of sweet a memory. Like, I made it sort of sound, I think we both made it sort of sound like it was Guantanamo Bay or something last episode, but it was actually it was really fun, and it's mostly good memories. So yeah.
So I agree with you in everything you say about Generation 3 and like how you define postmodern. I think that makes complete sense. And I agree with you about the sense of humor, the sarcasm, that all makes complete sense. But also, like, I just love Scream 4 people. I love them in general. I talk about it all the time. I think that they're so fun and cool. And I recognize them because I was in high school at the time Scream 4 came out. So, like, I was Generation 2 because I was a huge fan of Scream before Scream 4 came to be. But, like, I feel like Generation 3 is kind of a part of us, kind of not. I don't know. But I see it as, again, we're all sitting at the same table.
I think this was an amazing generation, and how do I say it? So I think we were sort of the last normal generation in terms of fandom. I think actually, so what happened with this generation, specifically in regards to Scream, was what ended up happening was Scream 4 underperformed, as we all know. So we were still on there for about another year and a half-ish, almost fall of 2012. We were very active on the forums, on the Ultimate Screen message boards. However, there was just something in the air. People were sort of almost like itching for a reason to jump ships, so to speak. And the MTV Scream Show was announced. A lot of people were happy. A lot of people were unhappy as well. The people who were happy were the people like me who were deluded, and who, it's that Kyle Richards video. We were all so happy that day. If only we knew how bad things would soon become. So basically that, we were just sort of silly. But basically I would just say the generation ended right around that time, maybe 2013, 2012. In general, there was a huge exodus of Scream fans. Even when the Scream MTV show premiered, I actually went back, made an account again with my old username, fully expecting, because the Ultimate Scream message board was up and running until 2016, if you can believe it, but nobody was on there. Maybe some of the mask people, like people who collected masks and stuff, some of those people, but it was like completely that it was like a post hadn't been made in like 2 weeks and stuff. So I went back on there for the premiere of the Scream MTV show, which sucked, by the way, but I went to see what people were saying, fully expecting people to go, be like mad and stuff, but what's sad, it was like nothing there. Nobody came back, so yeah.
So I just want to jump in here for a second, and talk about that time of Scream 4 in the box office results. So, it made about 18 million in its first weekend, and it was under the expectations because of Scream 2 and 3's being so high. They were Scream 2 and 3 got around like 32 to 34 million. So it was just expected Scream 4 was going to do what that did, just because it was automatic. And that's not really what happened. And then it didn't really have legs after that opening weekend. It didn't grow. It didn't sustain what it had and build on it. It just kind of fizzled out. And that was part of like the problem in the fandom, even though people were like, I think people liked it at the time, and they had this attitude like anything is better than 3. And and that has problems in and of itself. But like, even so, there wasn't like the burning passion for it that I think needed to happen in order for Scream to stick around in a real significant way, sadly. And I feel bad saying this because like, Scream 4 has passion and it has merit, and it just wasn't met well at the time. And I blame a lot of that on the distribution and the rollout of the release. So there's just so much more to the story than to simply just say, oh, it flopped.
All right. I wouldn't say it's our fault, honestly, at all. Like the fans were, let's just be real. Most of the fans showed up. It has nothing to do with the fans. And also a lot of people, like we were posting every single day, asking Dimension, being super crazy, asking for Scream 5, asking for updates, like telling them we will would support any following movies for a year and a half, like after Scream 4 came out. So it's not like everybody jumped ship immediately. It was just specifically for this forum. I think after the initial year, people sort of just assumed that the franchise is never coming back in its true form, so to speak. Obviously, we knew that MTV was happening and people were just sort of giving up, I guess. So which leads us into the next generation, which would be Generation 4. So this generation I have an interesting story with as well. So Generation 4, I'm gonna call this the Tumblr generation. So this was 2012 until 2019, 2020. Coincidentally, this was when the Scream TV show was coming out. The biggest fandom presence for Scream was on Tumblr, actually, at this time. I was on there as well. My first URL is what you're called on Tumblr. So my first username was Run Casey Run, and then one missed call. I was a very, very, very prolific GIF maker and editor on there. I'm masterful at Photoshop CS5. And actually, some of the GIFs you've used for your podcast when your posts for episodes were the GIF grids and stuff, some of those featured my GIFs actually. So yeah, they're all over Google image search and everything. Yeah,
I actually have a folder on my desktop that I've like transferred from like computer to computer over the years of GIFs I collected from that Scream 4 time of being on Tumblr. Being on Tumblr back then was so much fun. Like you had like Scream, it was like right after Scream 4, so there was so much Scream content. Sarah Michelle Gellar, Buffy, Ringer, Sarah Michelle Gellar's show, Ringer was on the CW at the same time as Scream 4. Definitely part of the era of that time for me. So Tumblr was a fun thing to do at the time, and that was until, it turned into kind of like the toxic, like how Twitter became toxic, with Tumblr kind of became that after a while. So like all the cool people that were on Tumblr kind of got pushed to Twitter, and now all the cool people that were on Twitter kind of are getting pushed out of there. So it's just like this weird toxic cycle of social media crap when it comes to very online weird people.
Yeah, I mean, the Tumblr era, the early Tumblr era was really amazing. Honestly, it was kind of fierce. I really enjoyed it at the time. It was more so this was also the beginning of the sort of mishmash, a lot of fandoms at once, a lot of people sort of crossing barriers from one fandom to the other, just a bunch of stuff. Like that was really a fun time for the fandom. But like I said, a lot of the Scream fandom presence was all of my edits and GIFs for the Scream franchise were always successful. People like also Scream 4 lingered for a number of years after it came out. It was also quite relevant in 2014, 2015. I remember actually going to a Halloween thing in 2014 and at a club, seeing a girl there dressed as Jill. That just goes to show that that movie had legs actually, and a lot of people did watch it and care about it. I think the thing with Scream 4 is most people probably watched it on streaming and on DVD than they did in theaters. But anyways, yeah. So the fourth generation, the Tumblr generation, how it relates to postmodernism and how it relates to politics and stuff like that, because this is where that comes into play as well. So the early Tumblr generation, I would say this was the true anti-postmodern era, both in terms of the media and the people online. I think this is the first time that those really aligned. Like I said, the 90s media very postmodern, the online people not very. The 2000s media was really sort of shallow. By the way, I like the 2000s media, but let's face it, it was very postmodern. But the online spaces didn't reflect that really. And with this generation 4, they were anti-postmodern in terms of online. People were very into aesthetics and vibes and very sort of saccharine tweet take on everything. Everything was really very highly romanticized. Everything was about being cool, being young, having fun, whatever, this and that. It was a very vibe-driven at the beginning sort of online space, and the media was also movies and the arts were also veering in a more tugging at the heartstrings, if you will, sort of a bit more saccharine. Stuff like the Hunger Games and the Twilight offshoots was all the rage at the time. A lot of romanticism, a lot of like really intense feeling and emotion. So not very postmodern, also very sincere. So yeah, this lasted for about 3 years at most. Shift, I would say, began in 2015 or 2016, when the anti-postmodernism in media remained in the arts. Everything needed to have a very sincere message, something very important to say, no matter what the movie was or the genre. However, what I find interesting, this is not something any other anthropologists or thinkers have really pointed out. This is completely my own theory. Something happened where a lot of people, especially online, veered into postmodernism again, which is really interesting because I don't think I've ever seen that before. I don't think this has ever existed before. So what happens is, in the late 2010s, the internet is so massive and so vast that basically it becomes like real life almost, because everybody's on it. I think the biggest difference between generation, I would like, let's just jump right ahead into generation 5. Leading up to Scream 5, Radio Silence, so it's 2020, 2021, the state of the internet and culture. So like I said, a very, very major shift into sort of this very shallow take on postmodernism, where every single thing is some sort of ironic, detached joke. Even when you're playing the victim, you sort of aren't fully committing to the victim sort of status, if you know what I mean. Everything basically online has turned into like a giant high school, and people join fandoms so that they could be in a clique, and that basically they could find some people to ostracize and bully. I think that's the whole point of fandoms and what fandoms are now. Generation 5, not now, let's say that's behind us, let's pretend, but this cultural schism of the late 2010s and the early 2020s is really something to behold. I don't think that a lot of Scream fans are actually, this is nothing exclusive to Scream actually, compared to a lot of other fandoms and a lot of other subgroups. The Scream fandom is really not that bad compared to some stuff, believe me.
So I just want to recap how I see all of the generations. So I think 1 and 2 are pretty similar, and I think even generation 3 can be in that same camp. It's a little bit different, but it's mostly in line. Like, for instance, 3 still sits at the same table as 1 and 2, even if there are slight differences. So then you have Generation 4, which is, it's cool, it's whatever, it's its own thing because the movies dominate this franchise so much. And then you have Generation 5, which is just like at odds, right, with the first 3 generations, maybe Generation 4. I don't even know where Generation 4 would really fall when it comes to like the Wes Craven films versus Radio Silence, or like where their interests lie in terms of like the future of Scream. They probably just want the TV show to come back. I don't know. I just want to describe how I see Generation 5, and I'm going to be very blunt, okay? And everything I'm going to say here, it applies not only to like the Scream fandom culture, but also just the internet culture at large, and a huge problem with the internet. Like, on the one hand, like there is like this like toxic positivity out there about new product that comes out, where you can't be constructively critical of the art, or you can't question the art, or you can't have a dissenting opinion, or say that the new art isn't the best thing ever, or else that is a cardinal sin, and that's offensive to this younger generation. And this not only applies to like the audiences, but even like film critics who are afraid of both the audiences and of the publicists and the studios, where they just stopped criticizing movies or critiquing movies. That's literally that's their job, is to critique movies, and they've stopped doing that. So on the one hand, we live in this like yes girl, queen slay culture, and it's insufferable. And I guess the thing is, when people try to have film discourse and like actually have contrasting points of view and argue about art, you know, it's seen as negative. And that to me is so intellectually dumb. It is anti-intellectualism at its finest. And it's kind of embarrassing that people are that sensitive, and also just also don't understand the nuance of what's being said, and like that there is room for all kinds of ideas, not just, oh my God, guys, this is the greatest thing ever. But in my opinion, there's almost something more sinister and darker under the surface of all of these things. And that is the way that media and art and the fandoms also engage with politics, that makes it really toxic. And especially because of how divided our country is in general, when you start like claiming art to be part of that tribalism, it also just becomes very uncomfortable. I mean, I don't need to remind Scream fans like about like what's been going on for the past 2 years in terms of like the way that like social justice activism, quote unquote, has like invaded the fandom in a really dark and crazy way. And I don't think anybody can really like look at what's gone on the past 2 years and say this has been something that's been for the good, where that Scream has benefited from this type of like association with different like partisan issues. And also, there's this worse element that there's like a step further where, people aren't even allowed to have an opinion about something without it becoming seen through those lens, or like you're attacked about your opinion through the lens of like that screamed at for just having a preference, or what their truth is about art and what their preferences are about like, hey, I really like the opening of Scream 2. I also really like the opening of Scream 4. The Stab 6 is my favorite opening. Oh, but there's violence, blah 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 blah. It's like, oh my god, shut up. Like, this is why no one wants to be your friend. But it's almost like this weird control over other people's thoughts and opinions that is just weird. It's not healthy. It's not based in freedom. It's not based in like a constructive thought. It's not anything good in terms of being stimulating and academic and smart and pushing forward. It's actually very regressive to act like this. And the last thing I'll say here is like, we didn't just see this with Melissa Barrera. Like, we saw it with like, so a couple of years ago, whenever Scream 5 was the it thing, people weren't even like on the Sam train yet. It was actually Mikey Madison. And like, so you see like these weird cosplaying of like taking like different actors or actresses or characters and like taking on their identity and like them as like they're in a parasocial relationship with them, which is not healthy at all, and like, so for instance, like my friend Zach Cherry, he talked about that just simply the fact that Amber was his least favorite killer and he was attacked as a raging misogynist. Like, that is insanity. Like, especially his favorite killer is Mrs. Loomis. Like, just because your fave isn't, someone else's fave, that doesn't give you the right to attack someone using like horribly serious things such as misogyny or racism or blah, 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 just to make yourself feel better. Like, that is completely and utterly wrong. So when you think about it, what we've been dealing with for the past 2 years, when you throw in like a very divisive issue about global affairs and using that as a way to judge others because of your faves, that's weird. So I guess the cliquishness that you talk about kind of does speak to me because of the fact that like you have this like the culture of Melissa Barrera, right? Where they're using what happened with Melissa Barrera as a way to bully other people. And I mean, I've been on the receiving end of that and it's fucking bullshit.
Exactly. And to make my point clearer, hopefully people will be able to understand. So postmodern is what Scream 4 did with the homage to the Randy scene behind you from Scream 1. Postmodernism, so the really stupid take on postmodernism would be what Scream 5 did. And like that's like, it's referential, it's homage, but it's really shallow, really stupid, super literal and really obvious. That would be like the distinction between like the postmodernism of the 90s and what we have later. So yeah, and also what I want to point out about this is not just about Scream. This is like an entire cultural shift. So everything becomes basically, how do I say, universalized. So everything is for everybody and therefore it's kind of for nobody. And what I mean by that is the way that the current iteration or the past generation, let's just shove them outside of what we have now, that generation was basically like copy paste any other fandom of any single thing, just replace. It's just the difference is that it's Scream and it's Scream characters, the same like edits, the same corny jokes, the same meme formats, the same putting random characters in front of random pride flags, in front of this and that, doing the very lazy TikTok sort of fan cams the last 20 seconds, but for some reason the footage that they use is repeated 16 times in those 20 seconds. It's very lazy. It's all very samey. It's sort of flattened into this sort of gray mush, and it's so it's sad to see everything become that. Basically, it was really sad. I think the Scream fandom had lost a lot of its original identity in this generation. It became unrecognizable. And also, what's funny, in summer of 2019, I remember checking Twitter specifically just to see if there were any Scream fans and any Final Destination fans on Twitter, like fan accounts, like not fans but like actual fan communities. I could not find find very many, if at all. And then next year, same time, 2020, all of these people like descended like from hell onto this realm. Yeah, and sort of like very overnight. And the first thing I noticed about them was sort of this very entitled, very childish demeanor and behavior in regards to Scream. They just sort of like came in 5 seconds ago and they think they're like running the show. The vibes were completely off. I knew there were trouble when I walked. Yeah, it was really not a pretty sight. And canceling Rebecca Gayheart and stuff like that. Like you, first of all, you are 14 years old. Like, calm down, please. You have no clue what you have no clue what you're talking about. And these people are legends, and maybe. I really don't understand. They join these fandoms and they think they own them and they refuse to let go. It's like there's other stuff for you to do if you like, you don't have to try to ruin this for everybody else. The reason for this sort of very insipid sort of toxic positivity in terms of like the actual movies is because the movies themselves are secondary, if not tertiary. The Scream franchise is sort of almost arbitrary for these people, like a thing to have a fandom about, which is so completely different. And I wanted to mention this before. I didn't think I did. Back then, when I was on the forums, 2011, 2012, very sort of like, we are there to talk about Scream. We love this thing. We are in a fandom because we are so obsessed and in love with this thing. Now it's all about I am this and that, sort of creating your own identity using a sort of Scream as a tool. Like, I want to be in a clique, I want to be in a group, and I've chosen that it's gonna be a horror. A lot of the Scream fandom people are like horror Twitter, quote unquote, so they're not just Scream specific, but like they're on horror Twitter. This is their thing, and this is the show that, so they behave in a way. I remember when people of my generation, I'm gonna be real, people complaining about the Scream 5 title, it just being called Scream, which is a completely, you can like meta blah 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 this, I don't care, that was annoying. I know it's supposed to be tongue-in-cheek, whatever. I do not care. That was really annoying. I hate that there's 2 movies called Scream. You are not Scream, you are Scream 5. Fuck off. So, so yeah, basically people were complaining, and a lot of these kids basically came out of the woodwork and were like, oh, you are toxic, annoying, blah, 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 incel, whatever. Like, I swear to you, like, critiques like that will get you called like an incel. I'm not even talking about me specifically. Anybody. And it's like they know what a fan is supposed to act like, and they're so almost like aliens imitating a thing. It's such a superficial, almost like disingenuous posing as, posturing as. I think this is what defines this generation the most, to be honest. It's like a complete lack of inauthenticity. They think they're supposed to act like that and defend these movies like that, and that's why they do it. And they also know that movies and art don't really matter that much. What matters is politics and tribalism. So obviously when an actress does something problematic or whatever, or even vaguely problematic, whatever, she's on the chopping block. They're gonna come after her, or whoever on the internet, any podcast hosts, they're gonna come after them. And it has, like I said, it has nothing to do, because it boggled my mind when Nev was announced to be returning in March of 2024. I was shocked because I hadn't really connected all of the dots back then. I was really shocked that a lot of these kids were like so cruel towards her, and calling her all of these names. I was like, this is unbelievable to me as a Scream fan, somebody who likes the Scream movies and likes Sydney. I don't know what she would need to do for me to like call her those names. And the thing is, they don't. It's not that weird, actually. It's because they don't care, and they never did, because it's not about the Scream franchise for them. It's not really about Sydney. It's not about anything. It's about having this sort of weird social media click thingy, and that's it. Yeah.
So just to look at it from their perspective, they would say, we don't care about Sydney because Sydney isn't our main character. Like, their main character, like their version of Scream, is Scream 5 and 6. So you know what, whatever. But I guess like I could understand that, like, their perspective there, if they were nicer, and if they were, think if they engaged in good faith discussion about 5 and 6, or allowed for constructive criticism, or allowed for, dissenting opinion of their point of view, rather than just attacking. I mean, my issue with the younger fans is the way that they choose to engage with Scream, or even just films in general, which is like very juvenile. And it gives me like, and like they don't get the excuse of, oh, well, they're young. No, it's almost like this different kind of viewing experience where how they talk about and discuss the movies, they don't really see it as art. They just like, it's just not very intelligent the way they approach movies and art and film and other things. And I don't want to sound like a dick, but that's part of the problem. And like for instance, here's a perfect example. Like, whenever I ask about Sam and the robe, everybody just loves that moment where she comes out and wearing Billy's robe and she stabs Billy to death after calling him and putting on this big show, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, so how does that make logical sense? Like, what does that mean? Like, what was she doing? Why did she do that? Explain it to me. Explain the meaning behind Sam doing that. This is the climactic moment of the movie. There should be something that the film is saying behind doing this very sensational, violent thing with its main character, by the way, the person we're supposed to be rooting for, the protagonist, the person who's supposed to be the hero, the person who is supposed to, whose side we're supposed to be on. How do you justify her actions there? And like the response is, oh, well, she's just cunty. That's why she's cunty. Again, I'm not being a dick, like, and this is literally verbatim. Like, I had this big post like a couple of years ago before Melissa was fired, and I asked, like, explain what you mean, how you interpret this, and that is like, I would say 50% of the comments were spiritually like that. Oh, well, she's cunty. That's why she did it. She's cunty. Like, stop talking like a drag queen and grow the hell up.
Yeah, and also I don't want to. Yeah, exactly, and I don't want to make it sound like we didn't joke back then, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm not silly on the internet and I'm not making jokes. I absolutely am. I know how to have fun. I know what memes are. I know what having fun means. But also I I am not just that, and I actually can meaningfully have a discussion about the things I like and the art that I like, and I don't think these kids can or ever have. So I think that's where the difference lies. I don't want to make it sound like we were all Nostradamus sitting around like in our black cloaks being super serious back then. No, it's not that. It's not that they're making memes or being silly or saying cunty, slay, whatever, because I say stuff like that, whatever.
I guess we are just like at an impasse with the older generations versus the younger generations. And, maybe it's not like their fault. Maybe it's just the culture that we're in right now, where it's about Marvel movies and superhero stuff and never ending franchises. And we're just conditioned to be this way. Our younger people are conditioned to be this way and think this way about things, as opposed to how they used to be and how culture has shifted. Maybe movies are just inherently different now. Maybe the whole industry is just inherently different now. That still doesn't make or excuse their lack of intelligence, or excuse how mean and cruel they can be when it comes to film discourse and this idea of like toxic positivity, like this idea that like we have to be so positive about everything all the time just because like it's about warm fuzzies. It's not about like looking at things and having an opinion and having thoughtful discussions about something. It's all about just like being like, oh my God, this is so great.
And also there's sadly a reason why the Scream franchise had sort of veered into that territory to begin with. It's because Scream 5 and 6 were really bad and really stupid. I'm sorry. But also relating that to postmodernism, what's really funny is actually a hot take. Scream 5 is not really actually a postmodern movie at all. It's barely even postmodern. So it's not a cynical movie. It's cynical towards Scream 4 exclusively. It's not a very referential movie in any meaningful way. It's very sort of direct, literal, and shallow, I would say. It's not really postmodern. It lacks a lot of the postmodern elements. So actually 5 and 6 especially doesn't even like register. So a lot of that sort of intelligence that is like woven into the first 4 movies is lacking in 5, and I think the fandom just reflected that at the time completely. So I think that's no coincidence either. I think had Scream 5 been slightly different or maybe a little bit better, I think probably the fandom wouldn't be a horrendous mess right now. So
I just want to say, I think what you're describing right now with like the postmodernism is like a very dumbed down version of postmodernism, where it goes for the lowest common denominator, like the most obvious type of thing, the most obvious type of reference. And I think we can see that obviously, like the best example is like Mindy on the couch in Scream 5. I mean, that was so on the nose, and it wasn't as clever or as cute as it thought that it was. It was just like copy paste. And even things like Sydney saying that in the dialogue about like Billy Loomis started this, or like Tara pulling out the knife of the holder in the opening scene when she's on the phone, like to referencing Drew Barrymore. Like it's so on the nose and so painfully obvious. It's not really like making much of a statement other than just a copy and paste reference, a copy and paste moment, as opposed to an intelligent homage or honoring of the original. Like when these moments happen, it's kind of like, well, duh, not, ooh, that's interesting. So I really hope that Kevin Williamson reinstills postmodernism into Scream rather than postmodernism.
They shouldn't have ever even been in there, honestly. So, no, let's just be frank. Scream 5, the way it happened, everything after Scream 4 up until now, I will just say it, it was a bad call after bad call after bad call. They shouldn't have even been a thing. So, of course, like the Scream franchise is gonna evolve back into some sort of normalcy. But now with those people, it's gonna get a lot of older people, like not in terms of age, but in terms of like generation, from generation 1 and 2. Like a lot of those people are gonna come back. They may not be online, but they're still out there, and we do have the numbers on our side actually. And a lot of new people are going to come in. So like I said, the exodus after Scream 4 2012, I can count on a single hand the amount of people I know from that forum now. Like they basically disappeared. I'm sure they're still Scream fans. They may not be super active, they may not be super online, but I'm sure they're still alive. Like, you know what I'm saying? So just because a haters ratio a Scream 7 tweet or you may look on Twitter like they have a leg up or something, that doesn't actually reflect actual reality. And that's something that they're gonna be really shocked to find out, I think, come the release of Scream 7. I may be wrong, obviously, but I'm gonna be a bit more optimistic with this. I do think that Scream 7 is gonna be a success.
I think Scream 7 is really going to surprise a lot of people, but I think Scream 7 is going to be very in tune with the roots of the franchise and be really scary and really dramatic in like a way that's like necessary and real. And I hope that it steers away from the kind of pitfalls that Scream 5 and 6, especially Scream 6, did with the sensationalism, the lack of kills, and like the uber weird violence. Also, I just don't think there's going to be the same kind of low-hanging fruit, lowest common denominator type of humor that Scream 6 had. But Kevin Williamson doesn't play by those rules. You know, even you can tell by his movie Sick that he does strive for the type of dialogue and humor and drama that he had in his, I know she did last summer, H2O. Honestly, I love your idea. And as a Gen 2 person, I think that it's so cool that we're living in this moment. And I believe that Scream 7 is going to spur the next generation in a way. We don't know what's going to be the generation that comes up in the Williamson era, you know, in 2026 and beyond. These are people who are probably too young to watch Scream now, who are going to be discovering Scream 7 when it comes out or shortly thereafter. So it's a very cool possibility. Whether Scream 7 is like the beginning of a new trilogy or if it's a two-parter, this is a new era.
I mean, look, no, it's obvious. Yeah, it's obviously not gonna retcon anything. Like I've joked about this idea in the past, but obviously Scream 5 and 6 are Spyglass's biggest hits ever. They're not just gonna retcon that and erase that. I never expected them to do that. As much as actually I would have liked that, I don't care. Whatever, I would have preferred that. I didn't expect it. However, that doesn't mean that a new leaf cannot be turned. And maybe even those characters can be utilized in some new, more thoughtful ways. So yeah, that's basically it. I'm very optimistic in regards to the future of the Scream franchise and the Scream fandom.
I agree with you. I think that Scream 5 and 6 are Spyglass's biggest hits, and they recognize that. However, I just feel like they are at a place right now where they don't want to work with Melissa, maybe Jenna too, I don't know. And like, no matter which way you slice the apple, you know, I think that a lot of people, no matter what kind of Scream fan you are, you could look at the situation from the past 3 years and think Spyglass has not handled this franchise with the delicacy that it deserves and that it warrants. And I think that by switching to this storyline with Neve Campbell again and her family and bringing in Kevin Williamson, I think that they are realizing that they need to commit to this. So I don't think they're going to be flip-flopping back and forth back to the Carpenter sisters after this. I think that, you know, everything happened the way it happened. They're committing to doing the Laurie Strode thing and the Blumhouse trilogy and going after Sydney and her family and just kind of pivoting, you know, firmly, officially to this storyline. Even if Sam is a part of the story, because frankly, I don't think Tara is going to be a part of Scream's future. Maybe down the road, like in 10, 15, 20 years when Jenna can't get any work or the volume of work that she thinks that she has right now. But even if like, well, let's just say Melissa does come back as Sam, I don't think Sam is going to be the main character again, or nor should she. And in fact, they set it up perfectly for her to be the perfect like supporting role kind of like suspect, given her proclivity to killing.
I mean, those two are never coming back. I don't know why, like, girl, like that's not happening. Like, so the biggest distinction between all of the generations, I think, like the most jarring jump is between 5 and 6. Generation 5 and 6, we are like, let's say generation 6. Like the schism, the gap is so vast, and we have so much junk that we've left behind that we're really sort of like born again in a way.
Ivan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your theory of Scream generations. This was super cool. Anybody out there who's listening who wants to send a message or comment about the generations, or if you belong to a generation and you believe in that, or if you have any comments on Ivan's ideas, please throw it on Patreon or of course on the Instagram or Twitter posts. So everybody, thank you so much for this discussion of Scream generations. Welcome to this next segment of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I should say Taylor Swift with Ryan C. Showers and Ashley. Hey, Ash.
Hi, Ryan. Wouldn't it be fun if Taylor Swift was actually here?
Taylor Swift is with Ryan C. Showers and Ash. Well, Ashley, this is the final episode of season 4, which is crazy to think about that how much has changed since the beginning of season 4 to the end of season 4. The podcast has been completely like flipped on its head. And for this occasion of like kind of the finale of season 4, the soft finale, I mean, like we come back on Tuesday. Come on, people. So don't act like, precious, but like this is the finale of season 4 in a way. So it's kind of like the end of the season. So Ash, what song have we picked for this occasion?
The Taylor Swift song of the day is Last Kiss. Now, this song originally, it came out on the album Speak Now, and obviously Taylor has re-released those. But listen to either one that you want is my new saying. And this was track 26. So it originally came out in 2010, then re-released in 2023. It was produced by Nathan Chapman and written by Taylor Swift herself. If we haven't mentioned, Speak Now was written solely by Taylor. And this song breaks my heart when you listen to it, especially the original version. She sounds so young, and just you can tell it's like she's dealing with like a really fresh, true heartbreak. And for me, it always has felt like she's going through the stages of grief, like explaining the stages of grief as you're going through a breakup. And then I randomly found an article with a quote from hers in that, and she kind of said that without saying that. And I felt really good that I was like, I feel like I might have interpreted this right. But it's a beautiful song, and sometimes you can even hear like her, like it sounds like her chin's quivering and she can't fully like articulate what she's about to sing, or if she's nervous or about to cry. And I think it's just a really beautiful sentiment because, like, unfortunately, there's always going to be a last kiss. There's always going to be that last time you see each other, no matter how the relationship ends. And I just think it's such a beautiful song.
Well, and the funny thing is, yes, there will always be a last kiss. There's always going to be a last moment. But the thing is, we don't always know that it's going to be the last whenever it happens. And I think that's part of the grief in the song is that she had a last kiss, but she didn't appreciate it for it being the last kiss. And so I have to tell you about this song. Okay. So, and Ashley said to listen, you can listen to both. And I agree to listen to both because I actually do like the Taylor's version, but the original version is like the one that you probably should listen to get the full effect for the emotion. So anyways, but I was not a fan of this song. I thought it was kind of boring for a while. And then once I kind of really started to get Speak Now in my soul in terms of like, we were talking about it on a YouTube channel recently, but like Speak Now, in my opinion, is about like the pain of growing up and not wanting to grow up and like coming into your own voice. And like, you're not like learning hard lessons, but you're starting to begin to make some moves, if that makes sense. But you also don't want to grow up. And I kind of felt that in my soul recently. And I listened to Speak Now, and then you stumble upon Last Kiss. And it's a 6-minute song, so it's very long. It's one of the longest songs she's ever made. And then I see it almost as like a warm-up to the masterpiece, which is All Too Well, 10-minute version. And it's kind of dealing with a similar topic, but in a similar like narrative style. Like she includes a lot of details about the breakup and about the end of the relationship here. Like, the time, which is 1:58 on July 9th, and like, talking about sitting on the floor in his clothes. Like it's there's a lot of dense material here in this piece of art. And I have to say, it's one of my favorite songs now. Like, there's almost something dreamy about it, because like it's kind of repetitive, but not really. The song just kind of sails by without like hitting so many different beats, but when it does, it's really impactful. It's very sad, this idea of like she's talking about saying goodbye to somebody, but like also being afraid that they won't miss her.
I love how you described it as dreamy and how it kind of sails by. I think that's like such a beautiful way of saying it. It almost feels like she's like singing herself a lullaby or something, like to like allow herself to fall asleep during this, because when you're in such a bad heartbreak, sometimes sleeping is like so impossible. But I love, this is one of my favorite bridge is when she says like, so I'll watch your life in pictures like I used to watch you sleep, and I'll feel you forget me like I used to feel you breathe, which just like cuts
Ouch.
to the knife. And then, but I also really love this verse where she says, you can plan for a change in weather and time, but I never planned on you changing your mind. And I'm just like, oh, that's like so heartbreaking. And that's such like the exact way, like if you feel bombarded or shocked by like a breakup, like it didn't feel like it was going in that direction, or your partner didn't express anything that they needed or were feeling. And I just feel like if you're kind of shocked, like that's exactly how you feel. It's like, I didn't imagine you changing your mind about like us or whatever it is. And this is like one of the songs that I think about all the time, and it made me like really open with my relationships. I ask my partner at least once a week, are you happy? Is there anything like going on that you want to talk about? Like, and I always ask him because he's not somebody who is super comfortable like naturally expressing that, where I am. And like we've had some really good conversations about things, and I'm just always, when we first got together, I was so nervous he was just going to change his mind about me.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like everything happens and things change as you get older. But I really appreciate that this song made me be like, I'm going to ask more questions and really try to communicate with my partner. Because I remember listening to it and just being like, I don't ever want this song to be one that reminds me of him. And
Right.
I just was like, I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to try to communicate better. I didn't mean to go so deep. But
No, I appreciate you going deep. Like, and we just did Cornelia Street recently. You talked about like the fact that he isn't a chatterbox. So
I know,
we
it's
love this.
shocking. I don't know why. People, one time my friend, she was talking to our boss, and she said, what's Ashley's fiance like? I think I saw that they just got engaged. And she was like, oh, they're really cute together. He's really quiet and she doesn't shut up, so they're kind of perfect.
Opposites attract, right?
But I think something that I really love and appreciate about Taylor is that I feel like I've learned lessons of life and stuff that I didn't have to experience, but I got to learn through her and like listening to the things that she's experienced. And I feel like people probably feel that way with different types of art, and you connect with whatever you connect with. But that's one of the reasons why I really appreciate her. I also like Last Kiss, like that could, like, I feel like you could also like twist this and Sydney could be like, what the fuck, Billy? I didn't think we were going to have our last kiss and this is how it was going to end and whatever. And like, obviously, like, I think one thing that I don't think many people think about is she also was like broken up with, like in a way, like, you know what I mean? She was like kind of dumped in like the worst way possible, like, and just like used and discarded in like a way that was just so brutal. And I feel like there would be like this anger, obviously, but after a while, like there would just be like a heartbreak of being like, I shared so much with this person and they just betrayed me in literally the worst way. And then like going on, like you could think about it with Derek, or the worst one would be thinking about it with Gail and Dewey.
Oh, but Gail and Dewey didn't get a last kiss in Scream. The last thing that we saw of them ever kissing was him kissing her hand in Scream 4 in the hospital. The last kiss really is that we see is them when they get engaged, which is crazy to think about. And it would be funny for Gail to talk about this, like saying, I don't even remember the last time Dewey and I kissed. Like, just think about that, like back in New York, because I'm sure they weren't kissing in New York, going to bed because he was so unhappy. But, who knows? I agree with a lot of what you said here. And like a lot of the pain here that she experienced that we don't have to. I like that. Taylor did it so we don't have to. But, the one line that I really like is, I love the I love how you walk with your hands in your pockets, how you'd kiss me when I was in the middle of saying something. There's not a day I don't miss those rude interruptions. And I think that like that's part of like the reflection of this song. It's a very introspective song and it's reflective. And I think that that's something that does relate to the Scream characters is as they move on in these journeys, like reflecting on, you know, the things that they may have taken for granted. Like, and I think that like Sydney wearing Derek's necklace is like the ultimate sign of this, right? Is like these, like the regret of like, you know, not appreciating things in the moment because of she was dealing with her own issues. So I think that's something that's really powerful. But, you know, but also a part of the chorus here is like, you know, all I know is I don't know how to be something you miss. And like, it's crazy to think about that. Like, you know, whenever we separate from somebody, like, you know, how do we step into that role of being something, a fond memory for someone, you know? So, and this applies so much to the trio who have lost so many people over the years. So, and will continue to as we, I guess, the duo now as we go into Scream 7. But I know. But, you know, I just wanted to say like, too, you know, again, this is like kind of a capper for season 4 because I'm giving it like a one last kiss before we move on to season 5. I mean, like there's been so much change, so many cool things we've done with the podcast. And I'm so grateful for everything that's happened over the past couple of months. And it's exciting to enter into season 5 afresh, anew, you know, because it's also going to be the season where we actually get Scream 7 and we see Neve Campbell return to the lead role of Scream, which is so cool, and Kevin Williamson. So, and Courtney Cox hopefully will have a better part. So it's just like, you know, season 4, there was no new Scream movie, which is crazy to think about. Like I was just bebopping around. Season 3 and season 4 really had no new Scream movie. We haven't had a Scream 6 came out during season 2 of this podcast. So I'm happy to like be kissing this moment goodbye, but also excited for what's coming next. But Ash, any final thoughts?
I'm just excited for the next season and to see what happens. And I feel like everybody should tune in because all of the plans that we've made and that you've shared with me are super fun. And I feel like everybody will love what's coming up. And yeah, if you haven't listened to this song, y'all, please give it a chance. It's just imagine that time that you were heartbroken and listen to it. And I feel like a single tear, Sinead O'Connor style, will just fall from your eyes.
I agree. And, you know, also just like, you know, this song is long and it's 6 minutes long. But again, don't you feel like in some ways this was like her warming herself up, trying to build the confidence to do All Too Well, 10-minute version?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, for sure. And I always like think about what songs are almost like sisters or have like connections. And I definitely feel like this is like more of like an innocent breakup. And then when you listen to All Too Well, it's like a little bit more of like a visceral, like life-changing type thing. When you listen to Last Kiss, I think, oh, these people could like eventually these people could move on and
be
eventually
friends.
Like maybe be friends.
Yeah.
Which, if you know who it's about or allegedly about, they were. But I also love this because like I think you can see so much of what's going on in this song. Like when she says like how you walk with your hands in your pockets. This person does walk with their hands in their pockets. And I think about it every time I see them because it's constant. Like if you see pictures of them, they always have their hands in their pockets. And I just think it's really sweet that that's like capturing this like little thing that she knows about him. And we know that every single one of you cannot wait to find out what the next Taylor Swift song of the day is.
I was like listening. I was like, she's building to Scream 7. Every single one of you is so excited to see Scream 7. We made it about Taylor, which is fun because like I just want to say like too, I always feel like TV shows have really good season 5s, like Buffy, The Good Wife. Those are like 2 of the big seasons for those shows. So I'm just excited. Like my season 5 gets to have Scream 7 in it, you know? So, and the audio commentaries for the Scream movies, you know, so it's going to be fun. I just want to, again, thank you everybody who has supported me since day one. But if you've just started supporting me since this episode or last week, you know, I love you too. And Ash, thank you for everything that you've done to help make season 4 really, really special.
Well, I am so happy to be part of it. I love this community and I love you and I love Scream. And so it's honestly a dream to be part of this.
And Ashley, where can they find you online?
You can find me at Squirrel and Spud 9 on Instagram. There you'll find my Etsy store. And also the Scream with Ryan C. Showers Scream Game of the Week, which is super fun. We try to come up with different guessing games every week. And we're cooking up a couple things that are a little bit different coming up soon. So I really hope you guys enjoy them.
Well, Ash, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All copyrighted material used or referenced in this show belong to their rightful owners and made possible by the Fair Use Act.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
Get another beer, you want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back!